Okay, Stark, wave to your fans. This is sixth period. Everybody wave. Oh, try again. There we go. All right, we all miss everybody that's stuck at home. All right, we got Big Bad Stark here, and what he's going to do is he's going to demonstrate for us just how strong he is. This is your traditional high school biology freshman book. This is your traditional high school biology student. AP biology it is. So here's the rule. What you're going to do is you're going to stick your arm out like this. And you can't have any give in your elbow. You're not serving pizza. We're going to see how long you can hold that out there for, okay? So, you ready? Here we go. All right. Let's time them. Need about 5 seconds faster. So, if you want to time at home, if you want to time at your desk, you're welcome to do that. The last period lasted 2 minutes. All time, every time I've done this every year, the record is 7 minutes. 7 minutes. I will say the student that did 7 minutes, the next period he had English, the teacher asked him to write it on the board. He ended up doing like, you couldn't lift his arms, so he ended up doing this. What are you feeling?
Fatigue.
Fatigue. Good word. I'm glad you didn't say tired. When you came in here, did you exercise at all today?
Not today.
So you would describe your oxygen levels as being pretty baseline?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Oh, that's the point.
No, just keep going. You're almost at 1 minute. You're at 1 minute now. Yes, Megan. Oh, it doesn't matter. Are you trying to say he's cheating?
No. I was wondering if that happened.
I noticed you're starting to arch your back a little bit. Trying to get some leverage there. You don't have the last 2 minutes if you don't want to. I'm just telling you what last period was. If you want to beat them, you have about 30 seconds to go. Okay. The student last period was Jake Velasquez. Anybody knows him? So you know Jake? Do any of you know Jake? If you do know him, you can say that you beat him. You have about 15 seconds and you'll beat Jake. What's happening right now? You're breathing really hard. I can hear it. All right. So, how do you feel?
My arm is tired.
Why were you breathing and panting so hard?
My oxygen.
Your muscles need oxygen. You left out a few things, but we're going to get to that today. You said his muscles needed oxygen to help support the weight. If you need to get a drink of water or anything, feel free. There's water over there if you need it with Clay. Do I need to call an ambulance? All right. You wanna wave to your fans there? Can you wave? Is your arm okay? All right. So here we go, guys. We are going to switch over to this. Okay, what we are talking about today is fermentation. And there's 2 basic types of fermentation, but what we're going to talk about mainly is what fermentation is, what are the good things about it, what are the bad things about it, is it efficient, is it not efficient, why does it even exist? And then that's really going to get us into the real deal cell respiration, which will be another day coming up soon. All right? Okay, so what you guys just experienced was an exercise called isometrics. I'm sure that a lot of you have been to a gym or at least seen a gym and people working out, and they're moving their body and curling and extending and flexing and all that stuff. They're doing a lot of repetitions. You're 1, 2, 3. Well, what he just did is actually far more efficient, because when you're working out, like if you're working out your bicep is meant to pull your forearm up towards your body. It's like a pulley. And so when you're extended like that, you're not doing anything. Then when you pull up, you are. What he was doing was his muscles were contracting nonstop. So when you're working out, Contract, relax, contract, relax, contract, relax, contract, relax. You hear that relax. What he was doing, contract, 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 permanent. So it was like holding up a weight, doing what you're doing working out, but nonstop. And that's called isometrics. It really wears you out. It's a heck of a workout. That really brings about muscle fatigue. Come on. Muscle fatigue a lot faster. So this is going to be cell respiration part 3. Fermentation. Now, technically, fermentation is not part of cell respiration. It's an alternative. It's like if you say, oh, I'm homeschooled. Well, you're not really in high school. You're doing an alternative. You might be learning the same stuff. But when you say you go to high school, like when you're homeschooled, do you really go to high school? Are you going to a high school? So if this is a cell, and this is my mitochondria, what major process takes place within that mitochondria? Anybody? No, that's not. I didn't say what it is. I said what major process takes place in the mitochondria. It's easier than you think. Don't overthink it. Cell respiration. And just by hearing that word respiration, what gas is required? O2, oxygen. So what type of environment is the mitochondria? Aerobic or anaerobic? It's aerobic. Oxygen is present and oxygen is needed. Well, what do you call all this open area within the cell outside of the organelles? That is the cytoplasm. And how would you describe the environment in the cytoplasm? That is anaerobic. Well, on Tuesday, we started with glycolysis. And whether you're going to do fermentation or cell respiration, you always begin with glycolysis. Now, if oxygen is present, so I'm going to put like a check for O2, like we have it, you're going to move into the mitochondria and you're going to perform cell respiration. You're going to be able to make a lot of ATP. What we're doing today is what happens if you don't have oxygen. So I have O2 here, and I'm going to put an X, which means no O2. You are going to perform not cell respiration, but fermentation. Fermentation is an alternative to cell respiration in the event that there is no oxygen available in the cell. There are 2 types of fermentation that we will go over today. I'll talk about the one that happens in you Homo sapiens in here. And I'll talk about the type that happens in other types of bacteria, some plants, and some fungi. So let's get to it. So, to completely break down glucose, the addition of O2 is necessary. So when you eat sugar, if you want to totally, quote unquote, burn the sugar all the way down to nothingness, you have to have oxygen. The reason why is because oxygen powers the electron transport chain. Now, you don't know what the electron transport chain is yet. You'll learn that on Tuesday. But for now, just know that it is the end of cell respiration. It's like the climax to the big story. It's where the Avengers finally fight Thanos. It's the big ending. It's where you make the majority of ATP in cell respiration, by far the majority. And that process requires oxygen. So if you don't have any of that O2 stuff, you are going to perform fermentation instead. So fermentation is anaerobic. It has evolved without the use of oxygen. Because it is anaerobic because it takes place in the cytoplasm. and it is limited in the amount of ATP that it can actually produce. Now, I had had it originally intended on keeping this next little factoid for later. I figure I'll just tell you now. So let's say I have glycolysis, and I can go one of two ways. If you do have oxygen, so I'm going to put a check mark for the oxygen, and you move on to cell respiration. You know how much ATP you'll make per glucose molecule, per little C6H12O6? You'll make up to 38 ATP per glucose. That's a lot. You think about how many molecules of glucose are in the food that you eat. Every one of those molecules can make up to 38 ATP. Pretty good. Let's say if you don't have oxygen. So we'll put a red X here. You move on to fermentation. Do you know what the total number of ATP you make in that? 2. 2 ATP per glucose. So clearly, cell respiration is more abundant in the amount of oxygen or the amount of ATP that you can make. So I mentioned to you that there are 2 types of fermentation. Let's get into that now. First type is called lactic acid, and lactic acid is also called lactate. Lactic acid fermentation. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the type of fermentation that you as mammals produce or go through. This is found in animal cells and some bacterial cells. In lactic acid fermentation, pyruvate, and by the way, pyruvate is also called pyruvic acid. If you think back to Tuesday, how many carbon atoms make up a pyruvate? Do you remember? Hannah? 3. So I'm going to call it a C3 molecule. Pyruvate is reduced by NADH to form lactate. And lactate is a C2 molecule. Now let's see how well you guys were listening on Tuesday. Hold on, Megan. I used the word reduced. What does that mean? What gained electrons? Right. The pyruvic acid or pyruvate, same thing, received electrons from NADH. That caused NADH to be oxidized back to NAD+. Megan, what would you like to say?
And then with that, in animals, doesn't it oxidize the NAD?
It oxidizes the NADH to become NAD+. Yep. Okay. Now, the other type of fermentation, which we will talk about now, is called alcohol fermentation. This occurs in some plant cells, some plant, fungal, and bacterial cells. Pyruvate, which is a C3 molecule, is reduced to alcohol and CO2. And by the way, alcohol is a C2 molecule, carbon dioxide is a C1 molecule. If you've ever had yogurt, cheese, sauerkraut, those foods are made by fermentation. When you get older and you're legally allowed, because I know you guys can wait till you're legal, if you ever have alcohol, like beer or wine, those are made by fermentation too. In fact, have any of you ever heard of the show Game of Thrones? Well, anybody ever heard of Tyrion? You know, the short guy? He's always drinking wine. Like, they made all these shirts that I drink and I know things. Well, he was talking with the leader of their army. His name is Grey Worm. And he's trying to encourage Grey Worm to drink some wine. And Grey Worm has been a soldier his whole life. He never dabble in things like wine or women or anything. He's just fight, fight, fight. That's all your life is. And so he hands Grey Worm a glass of wine and says, drink with me. So he drinks some wine, and Grey Worm says, ugh, it tastes like it has turned. And Tyrion says very proudly, ah, yes, the wonders of fermentation. He was alluding to the fact that wine is made exclusively by humans within those wine cellars and wineries. And what you're basically doing is you're depriving grapes of oxygen. And in the absence of oxygen, they're going to produce, in this case, alcohol. You guys will produce lactic acid. So when Stark was working out over here with the book, his muscles were filling up with lactic acid, and it was making him very fatigued. If you remember, I asked him, you're right now, you're your baseline. Are you exhausted at all? He goes, no, I'm fine. So his oxygen levels were up here. But as he's holding out that book, the oxygen levels in his muscles was going down. Because oxygen is like gasoline in your car. You do nothing but burn it unless you refill it. And so the oxygen levels are going down in his muscles. He needs oxygen to make ATP for cell respiration. So as he eventually starts to run low on oxygen, so what process is he going to start doing instead of cell respiration? Fermentation. And fermentation makes a little bit of ATP, but at a cost. As oxygen is going down, what's going up in his muscles? Lactic acid. And it doesn't feel good. And I'm going to tell you later exactly what does too much lactic acid in your muscles and your blood do for your overall health and well-being. Well, another example of fermentation would be bread. Does anybody know what the microorganism is that we use to help bread rise? Yeast. Do you know what type of organism yeast is? It's not a bacteria. It's a fungus. What else do we use yeast for? Anybody know? Beer. Now, when you guys get older and you're legally allowed to drink, you might go with your friends to like some brewery, and might go out to a bar. And bars have dozens of different beers, but it's not just, why don't they all taste the same? Just like there's different types of bread and they all taste different. Because there's different species of plant. Beer is made from wheat, it's made from hops, it's made from barley. Those are all plants. You know, there's different species of wheat and barley and hops, just like there's different species of shark. It's not just shark. There's great white sharks, there's hammerhead sharks, there's mako sharks, there's whale sharks, there's a whole bunch of different types. So there's not just wheat. There's not just hops. There's many different species. And brewers use those various species to make very different flavors of beer. If you go to a brewery, they might have 30, you go to the Wharf down in Channelside, Sparkman. They'll have, in their little beer garden in the middle of the Wharf, you'll see like there's 40 different beers. Because they all taste different. Because they all use different ingredients. They all use different types of plant. We use fermentation to make all those, and they all taste different. So when you guys get old enough, you might say, oh, I want a number 3, she'll take a number 7, my mom over there is going to take a number 12, and my dad's going to take a 16. And they get all together. They don't all taste the same. They all taste very different, and people have their different tastes. So moving on. The same thing goes with bread, yogurt. Anybody here like sauerkraut? You like sauerkraut?
Like in the sandwiches?
No thanks. Nope. All right, so let's get to why is fermentation beneficial? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to redraw what we did on Tuesday, but I'm going to do it a lot faster. the same stuff, just abbreviated, okay? I'm going to try to get to a main point I want to make, and this is probably one of the most important parts for today's class. So in order to make that point clear to all of you, I need to get this drawn first. So I want you guys to try to help me out if you remember Tuesday's lesson. Here we go. I'm going to do glycolysis first. And in glycolysis, what do we start with? We start off with glucose, which is the C6 molecule. Okay? Glucose is going to have 2 ATP. And what's that word where ATP gives a phosphate to something? It phosphorylates glucose. And I'm going to kind of skip a few steps here. And what we have now are 2 molecules we have 2 molecules of G3P. Okay? Remember, this is an abbreviated version of Tuesday's lesson. Then we have a few things that go on. First, 2 NAD plus molecules come in, and they're going to oxidize G3P, and they will themselves be reduced into 2 molecules of NADH. Do you remember what NADH is? 2 words. What is NADH? Electron carrier. That's right. And I'm going to come back to NADH because that's one of the main things I want to talk about. That's one of the main reasons I'm redrawing this. Okay, you have 2 inorganic phosphates going to join in the fray here, and you'll now have two molecules of BPG. Each BPG has 2 phosphate groups attached to it, or bonded to it. Well, remember, I'm kind of cutting out a few steps, but I am still representing them. 4 ADP will come in and take those phosphates away, and that's going to make 4 ATP. And that's going to leave you with 2 molecules of pyruvate. Okay. Guys, that's glycolysis. It's much more abbreviated than what we did on Tuesday on cell respiration part 2. Here's what I want you guys to gather. I want you to focus on this. 2 NAD pluses went into glycolysis. They came out NADH. So let's see if you can use your words properly. NAD plus took 2 electrons and a hydrogen from it, but just focus on the electrons. If NAD plus took the electrons, what would you say happened to NAD plus? What happened to the NAD plus? It was reduced. What happened to the G3P? All right. When you take electrons, you're being reduced. When you're giving them up, you're being oxidized. Okay? Now, here's where we get to the really important part. If there is oxygen, whoops, wrong color. If there's oxygen, so I'm going to say O2 with a green check mark, that NAD plus is going to move on to cell respiration, more specifically the electron transport chain. But we're not doing that today. We are going to talk about when there is none. So when oxygen is not present, it is going to move on into fermentation. Now, no matter if you're going to perform lactic acid fermentation because you're an animal, or if you're going to, or some bacteria, or if you're going to perform alcohol fermentation if you're some species of plant, fungi, or bacteria, the same is still going to happen. So let's do both pathways, all right? Let's say that you are an animal. I'm going to represent that with orange. This is lactic acid fermentation. what is produced is 2 molecules of lactate. And lactate is a C2 molecule. If you are a plant or a fungus or a bacteria that goes through the other type, you will perform alcohol fermentation. And you are going to perform 2 molecules of alcohol and 2 molecules of CO2. I'll let you all catch up, and I'll explain the main reason I'm showing you this and the main reason I'm redrawing what we did Tuesday. I'm going to talk about what role does NADH have with this. Okay. Let's see if I still have a picture up here. Let me see if I can figure this out. Google. Ah, shoot. Okay. Let's go. I'm trying to pull up an image on Google. Surface of bread. That's not what I was looking for. Surface of bread. That's embarrassing. Okay. Okay, I want you guys to check out the surface of bread. What causes these little holes? Huh? It's the same stuff that is fizzing to the top of a beer. What is it? It's carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide forms these holes. So when you are fermenting yeast to make bread, it produces CO2. It's the same stuff that is forming the holes that Swiss cheese. If you ever had pizza before, it's the same stuff that forms those big bubbles that are near the crust of the bread, of the dough. If you like pizza, you ever heard of thin crust pizza? What do you think they don't give as much of to thin crust pizza as they do to regular pizza? Yeast. That's it. The bread, the dough has not been raised as much. It hasn't risen. So let me show the kids at home what I'm looking at. So when you look at the holes in this bread, those holes are caused by carbon dioxide. That's caused by yeast. The yeast make the carbon dioxide, just like when you see like a pitcher or a glass of beer, you see a bunch of fizziness going to the top. That is carbon dioxide. It's been fermented. All right, so what does that have to do with this? Well, I want you to follow the path of NADH. NADH is on this purple line, and it's going to go to both, okay? I want to make this clear to all of you. Please listen. Just because I have this purple line going on the alcohol side, it affects both. We clear on that? It happens on both. It goes to both. Here's what's going to happen. NADH reduces pyruvate. There's that word again, reduces. So what does NADH do to pyruvate when you're going through fermentation? What does it need to reduce it? It gives the electrons back to pyruvate. That causes pyruvate to break down into either lactate or alcohol and CO2. It depends what type of organism you are. Stark felt that lactic acid. If we performed alcohol fermentation, you would have gotten more drunk as you stood up there. Well, you did. You felt the burn because lactic acid kind of burns. Yes? It was just, I was not done with my arrow yet. It was like a to be continued. Why is it going back out? Because I'm going to finish it all up. So after NADH has been reduced, or excuse me, NADH reduces pyruvate, what does NADH change to? It goes back to being NAD+. And NAD+ is going to go back to glycolysis. And it is recycled over and over and over and over and over. Look up here. NADH travels down to fermentation. It reduces pyruvate. NADH is back to being NAD+, and it goes back to glycolysis again. What I want you also to notice, guys, this is a very important moment right here. You ready? If this is not done, if you do not reduce NAD+ to become NADH, then you do not get these. You do not make ATP. I'm going to repeat that. If NADH is not made, it's not reduced, you will not make ATP. So it is important, very important, that the NAD+ gets restocked. Some of you drive. You have to fill up your gas tank. What would happen if the gas stations never refilled their stock? Your car would not be running anymore. You have to replenish the supply of NAD+, and so that is what is happening here. NADH is reducing the pyruvate, causing NAD+ to be formed, and then NAD+ goes back, just like a gas station being restocked with fuel, and so you can make ATP again and again and again. So you can make a lot of ATP, or not a lot, but you can make a decent amount of ATP. There's a consequence though. Not only are you making more ATP when this is going through, but what else are you making a lot of? Lactic acid if you're an animal, alcohol if you're another type of organism. So that's the bad side, is you might be making enough ATP to last you for the short term, but the cost is you're going to be building up the amount of lactic acid. So that's what was happening to start. Every second he did this, he held out that book, more lactic acid was forming. And his muscles were doing pretty well. But the book didn't gain weight. His muscles were getting fatigued because they were running out of ATP. Because when he started, he was making ATP by cell respiration. But as he continued, his oxygen levels went down. They went down so much that there wasn't enough oxygen to fuel cell respiration. So his cells did fermentation as a backup. And he started to get really shaky. He started to feel a little painful. Whenever you feel muscle cramps or things like that, sometimes that's because your muscles are not used to lactic acid, and lactic acid damages them. When you work out a lot, your muscles get used to it. But when you're new to working out, they say the first workout is the hardest and it hurts the most because your muscles aren't used to it. So let's talk about the benefits and the consequences, or the advantages and disadvantages of fermentation. All right, for those of you that said you like cheese and yogurt and sauerkraut, humans use anaerobic bacteria to produce yogurt, milk, sauerkraut, beer, wine, vinegar, and other industrial cleaners. I'm not going to really get into those. Things like soap and whatnot. If you are lactose intolerant, basically the bacteria that's in your body doesn't have the ability to ferment the milk that you're drinking. But for things like yogurt, or did I say milk? Excuse me. I meant to put cheese. Cross that out and replace it with cheese. For some people, they can process yogurt, they can process and digest cheese because that has already been fermented. But they can't do milk because it has not been fermented. All right. Oh, bread. Forgot about that. And that's a fungi. Remember, that's not a bacteria. It's yeast. Now, as I said, only 2 ATP are produced by glycolysis and fermentation. It's not a lot. This can be necessary and beneficial for short bursts of energy. Short bursts of energy, not drawn out. Yes, Jasmine? Because glycolysis and fermentation are going to be connected in this. You technically don't make any ATP in fermentation. But when you go, if you look back up here, what we're talking about today is you can't have fermentation without glycolysis. So we're talking about that. So glycolysis precedes fermentation. So we consider the two of them together in this. Okay. Now, here's the downside, guys. The products of fermentation are toxic to cells. So when we're talking about, let's talk about lactic acid specifically. Muscles produce lactic acid. When you're working out, as you work out more and more, it would be logical that your muscles are going to start to produce more and more lactic acid. Lactic acid is carried away from the muscles by the blood. Now, for those of you that have taken chemistry, if I put something acidic in your blood, would that cause your blood pH level to drop or rise? Drop. And for those of you that are not taking chem, I'll break that down in a moment. So lactic acid lowers your blood pH. For those of you that may not be familiar with the pH scale, it's on a scale of 0 to 14 with 7 in the middle. Anything between 0 and 7 is considered an acid. Anything between 7 and 14 is considered a base. As humans, our blood has a pH of about 7.1 to 7.4, so it's right around there. We have everything within our bodies: water, sugar, salt, electrolytes, temperature, pH, you name it. White blood cells, red blood cells, all of it has to be within a very specific range to maintain equilibrium. If any of those that I mentioned and more get too high or too low, you could be in trouble. Well, if your blood becomes so acidic that it changes the pH level, you get closer to 0 and further away from 7, that is called lactic acidosis. It's where your blood pH is being acidified by lactic acid. This can damage your tissues and your organs. And what two organs does blood go through all the time? Your heart and your lungs. And so if you have acidic blood, and when I say acidic, I'm talking about like a pH maybe 6, maybe 5.5, that can damage your tissues. Just like acid rain can damage the soil in the trees. There's actually a case at the University of Iowa, I think maybe around 10 years ago, where there was a really grueling practice, really tough. And I'm sure a lot of you have been active in some way, shape, or form. You have a coach pushing you and push you to try to get every little drop of sweat out of you, and you're just like, I can't go anymore. And they say, you got to go one more. Keep going. Come on, you can do this. There is something in pushing yourself past your limits. You don't know your limits unless you push them. But there is also something in listening to your body, knowing when enough's enough. You have to know when to say when. And these players were being pushed far beyond their limits. So much so that I think at least 2 of them, they developed lactic acidosis and had to be hospitalized because they're just secreting way too much lactic acid in their blood. And they were okay, they were fine, but it's not a good look when you got players that had to be hospitalized due to a workout. Not because it was too hot, not because they were out of shape, but because the coaches were screaming at them so much to keep going that they weren't allowed to stop. And so that wasn't a very good look for them. All right. So in order to get this lactic acid out of your system, we're going to talk about oxygen debt. So imagine Stark goes to the gym and he's bench pressing. He's not moving anything except his shoulders and his arms. He's not running. He's not swimming. He's laying down on his back. He's doing some bench presses. So he was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And he racks the weight and he gets up. He goes, why is he exhaling so vigorously? Why is he trying to bring in huge gasps of breath? He's trying to get oxygen into his system because every bench press was burning oxygen like gasoline in your car. And he had to replace that oxygen. But let me ask you all this. When he's working out, what is the priority? His muscles or his liver? When he is working out, what is his body prioritizing? The muscles or the liver? Think about it. Is he bench pressing that bar with his liver? No. When you eat a burger, what system in your body is prioritized by your body? Your digestive system. That's why you feel tired after a big meal. You don't want to go running up Bayshore after that. You want to lay down because your body's taking all the energy to digest that big meal. Well, when you're working out, you're worried about your muscles. If you're being chased by a vicious dog or an alligator or something, your body's going to focus your energy to your muscles and your legs and your lungs so you can breathe air, get oxygen in your muscles, and run really fast. So your body tends to prioritize things. So as he's working out, lactic acid levels are building. And once he stops, then the priority can be sent to your liver. The liver cleans the blood of lactic acid. But it really doesn't do that until you're done working out. Your liver really doesn't clean it out while you're working out. Yes, Duncan?
So does that mean like is lactic acidosis like a temporary condition?
It's temporary if you stop working out and you start breathing in air. In fact, something I was hoping that we would do today, we don't have time, is we would go out in the hallway and you all would do wall sits. And something I would tell you to do is breathe, breathe, breathe. You got to get the oxygen in there so you can try to fuel your muscles for as long as you can. The liver cleans the blood of lactate, but it's not going to start until you're done working out. Because when you're working out, you need your muscles to work out. And that's the priority. Just like when you're eating food, the priority is your stomach, your intestines. And so the oxygen debt is the amount of oxygen needed by the liver to clean the blood. So I could see Stark when he sat down, he was just like, whew. That's how we all feel when, you know, he didn't run a mile. We know that running can be exhausting, you're out of breath. But just sitting there or standing there and doing something, that still burns oxygen. And not only until after you're done with that do you start to replace the oxygen that you owe yourself. So it's important. The moral of the story is if you are someone in here who exercises, make sure you breathe. You know, when I would walk into the Plant High School gym and I see like the JV football team working out, I'll see the fifth grade, or I was going to say fifth graders, the ninth graders or the 10th graders, they're like this. Like, you're suffocating yourself. Breathe. Open your mouth. Go. You got to let oxygen in to fuel your muscles. You can't starve them of O2. You're going to pass out. All right. We're about done. Okay. Let's just do the inputs and the outputs here. We're going to get out of here. So the inputs to glycolysis, or excuse me, fermentation. Inputs. Glucose, 2-ADP. Outputs, you either have 2-lactate or 2 alcohols and 2 CO2s, and you have 2 ATP. Here's the last little fun fact. In fermentation, you are only getting 2.1% of the energy that you could get from sugar. That's it, 2.1%. Imagine that you fill up your car with the fuel and I told you that you are only getting 2.1% of the energy in the fuel you put in your car. That's a 97.9% waste. All right, we will stop there.